And welcome to another episode of Primility Primer, our morning reminder of the power of balancing pride and humility as we go about our daily lives. This is episode number 47. I am your host, Jared Morris, and it is Wednesday. And that means that it is time for another installment of Wisdom Wednesday. And for today's wisdom, I went to one of my favorite books on the subject of primility. And the book is called Humility by David J. Bobb. I'm holding it up here for those watching the video. Uh, okay. Sorry, I was getting some feedback in my ear there. So, yes, today's Wisdom Wednesday comes from the book Humility. And I want to start out simply by asking a question. And I think I know the answer to it for most of you who are going to be watching and listening. I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think I know the answer. How many of you find it hard to be humble, to feel humility? How many of you find it hard? Maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time, right? I know I'm raising my hand right now. My guess is that a lot of you are raising your hand right now. And the reason why is because for most of us, pride is our natural state. And it is so easy to view the world through our own eyes, to get wrapped up in what's going on in our own lives, that these feelings of pride and looking at everything from our own standpoint is much more natural than stepping outside of that and viewing things from the perspective of others. Again, thinking of others more than we think of ourselves. And that is the topic of the passage that I actually want to read to you from this book, Humility. And it's not going to, as you're going to hear, it's not going to require a whole lot of explanation, because it sounds like something that we would talk about here on Primility Primer, frankly, because this book has been a big influence on me. And so it naturally, I hope, comes out in some of the things that we talk about here on Primility Primer. So here's the excerpt. And again, this is from Humility by David J. Bobb. It doesn't take long to get into this excerpt because this happens on pages 4 through 6. It's going to be a longer excerpt that I'm going to read. And I'll talk a little bit more about the book here after I'm done with this. But if you go to primility.com/show/047, you can get the notes. You can actually read this entire excerpt, and you can get a link to get the book if you want to. So here we go. This is from Humility by David J. Bobb. No one is naturally humble, but pride comes as easily to us as sleeping or smiling. My wife and I can see that almost every day in the lives of our two sons. In one unforgettable moment several years ago, our older boy reached an infant's peak of pride. Sitting upright without any assistance, flexing his flabby muscle of independence, our little explorer looked like he had summited Everest. An explosion of pride lit his face. Beaming, my wife and I reflected that pride back to our baby. "We're so proud of you," we exclaimed. It is a phrase a fortunate child will hear often enough to enlarge his heart, but not so frequently as to swell his head. Just as pride comes naturally to human beings, so too does arrogance, or pride that exceeds the reality of one's merit. Arrogant people celebrate their own existence above all else and enlarge their own orbit at others' expense. To be proud of one's accomplishments, family, or country makes sense only if they are worthy of that pride. Healthy pride is tied to truth, and pride devoid of merit is arrogance. Humility's opposite is arrogance, not pride. Though the virtue of humility is occasionally praised in some faraway tribe, remote religious order, or politician's rural birthplace, the reality of our fame-addled and power-hungry existence today means that arrogance is rewarded and humility is ignored. Ego trips are occasions for everyday media adulation. Cocksure, supercilious, and narcissistic displays of arrogance abound in every arena of life, while acts of humility go unnoticed and unheralded. Our age of arrogance obscures the idea that humility is the indispensable virtue for the achievement of greatness. The personal significance of this idea is radical. To be truly great, one has to be humble. Skip ahead just a tad to the section with the heading, "It's hard to be humble." But it's not easy at first glance to see how humility could ever lead to greatness. Humility hardly seems that good, let alone great, implying something lacking. a loss of strength, or a sapping of vitality, humility often strikes modern individuals as something to be avoided. Observed superficially, humility can appear weak and passive, anything but great. Greatness seems strong and energetic, anything but humble. It's hard to be humble, Muhammad Ali is reported to have said, when you're as great as I am. Humility is hard to achieve, even when you're not the greatest. It's more difficult to be great and humble at the same time. After all, humility requires exacting and often painful self-knowledge for any person, but especially for one who thinks himself great. The humble person must acknowledge that he is not self-made, nor at the center of the universe. Unblinkered self-knowledge reveals our imperfections. Humility requires that we admit when we are wrong and then change course. It is the soul's state of self-knowledge in which we put others ahead of ourselves in thought, word, and deed, despite our tendency to self-aggrandizement. So that is our wisdom for this Wednesday, again, from the book Humility by David J. Bobb. If you go to primility.com/show/047, you can read that entire passage. There is a link there to buy the book. And I think, to me, what I take away from that passage, there are really two things. Number one is, don't beat yourself up if you struggle with humility, because I think that is, as this passage says, that's the natural state. It's easy for us to get caught up in what we're doing. Again, to take pride in everything around us. That's the natural state. And so it's okay if that is your default. There's not something wrong with you. You're not bad. You're not just a selfish person. But the second thing to take away is that it is important to practice intentional self-awareness. And frankly, that's the big idea here with Primility, right? Self-awareness for self-determination, which basically just means stepping back, using Primility as simply a framework to see where we might be out of balance, specifically with respect to pride and humility. And as David J. Bobb says here, the opposite of humility is not pride, it's arrogance, right? And we talk about how arrogance is on, if we look at pride and humility on the spectrum, arrogance is way on the far side with pride, while meekness, right, is way on the far side of humility. But there in the middle, in that sweet spot, is where humility and pride come together. They don't need to be these opposing forces that cancel each other out. They're complementary forces that multiply the power of each one. And so I think when we practice that self-awareness, and when we realize that we do tend to have a natural state, what is that state? What do we need to do sometimes to pull ourselves a little bit this way, a little bit that way? That's where we find that sweet spot. And if you're feeling at all like humility is hard for you, like it's hard to do consistently, then maybe it's just time to try and incorporate some new way of self-awareness to try and combat whatever that natural state is. For me, wearing this red wristband has been a huge help, because it's a constant reminder that I need to be focusing on pulling myself back from one extreme or the other. If that's something that you think would be helpful to you too, go to primility.com/join. Not only will you get on our email list, you'll get a notification for how you can get this red wristband. I've actually got 3 or 4 of them that I'm going to send out today from people who have requested them recently. I love sending them out. A lot of people have told me that it's been very helpful. I know it's been helpful for me too. So if you would like one, let me know, and I will be happy to send one your way. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Primility Primer. I always really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with another brand new episode. We go live at 6:30 Central Time at primility.com/live. And of course, you can catch the video, the podcast, anytime thereafter. Just go to primility.com/primer. All right, everybody. Stay cognizant of your pride and humility. I will talk to you tomorrow. Wrist bump.